how do we, how do we make our Angular application do something, right? If we come in here and we just do an NX serve, which is how we're going to turn on our web server to serve up our application, you'll see that we don't really have a whole lot. And the nice thing about NX is that these build times get better, especially since we're using the cloud. So by default, NX adds a whole bunch of documentation and stuff in a new project so that if you want to learn Angular and you want to learn NX, all the documentation and everything's here. We aren't going to be using this. We're going to be building just a simple to-do application. So let's wipe this out. How do we do that? We're going to go back to VS Code. And we're going to look at the folder structure. Inside of our folder, it has added a Learn Angular NX welcome component. We've got an SCSS file that has nothing in it. We've got our test file for Jest that has nothing in it. We've got our app component that has, basic, our module. This is our app component that goes along with our app module. And this is the module pattern that Angular has used up until Angular 14. Angular 14 changes this a little bit, and we'll look into what we can do differently with modules and with moduleless components in the future. But for right now, we're on Angular 13, so we're going to be using modules. We probably should understand modules. Modules are a way to group items together and then import them kind of as a package into other parts of our Angular application. They're the building blocks kind of that Angular uses to make sure that everything fits together. And when you add your piece to another piece, that all of the dependencies that piece needs come along with it. The downside to that is that often these module files are forgotten about when you're working inside of your component. And so when you add stuff, you may forget to add something to the module. You'll get errors. And we can do, like right now, if we look in our app module, we don't have the forms module imported. So if we come into here and we just add a simple HTML input and we add an ng model to it, and we set this equal to some property. Inside, well, let's make sure that we add some property to our component. So some property. So for right now, we'll just set it equal to nothing because we're really just going to get rid of this code and throw it away. Event is not assignable to type string. That's a strange error. The error I was actually looking for is the one right here. And anybody who's worked in Angular has probably seen this one a million times in their tests. Even in projects, you go to save something and something breaks. And this is one of the downsides to the modules, because all you wanted to do was add an ng model to your property. But in adding that ng model, you forgot that to do this, we need to come into the module and we need to import the forms module, right? So now that we've imported the forms module, now our ng module works just fine, or our ng model works just fine. And if we come back to our browser at the very bottom, where did my input go? Everything compiled okay. We'll take out that NX stuff. We're not going to use it. In the past, NX used to generate a whole bunch of stuff in this app component. So that's all been generated. It's nice that they create their own component because we'll see that it's easier. Okay, so now, we're bound to some property and everything works. But the big downside to everything we just looked at is that you had to know to add the forms module to the app module. And, if we've got a bunch of components under here, and we add more stuff, then this app module just keeps growing. And then you have to remember where to add it. And then in your unit tests, you forget to add stuff. And so the module, it works well, and it works really well with libraries. And it solved the problem really well. The downside is that if I'm looking at appcomponent.ts, I have no idea what my dependencies are. Where did these dependencies come from? None of that stuff. Our module file has some stuff in it. These declarations tell us that these components are available inside of our module. Imports are the modules, other modules that we might import. Providers doesn't get used as much, but this is where you interact with dependency injection, things that you inject in the constructors. And then Bootstrap tells it what component to load when the module starts. We are going to delete this NX module, and that breaks our app module. So we're going to take out all references to that. And at this point, let's just try building a simple to-do list. We'll start with that right out the gate. Just look at what we would do to build a simple to-do list, and then see how to make it look nicer, what we can do with the data, things like that. So let's start. We're going to be using just our app component HTML and our app.component, right? And so right out of the gate, we'll just say, you know what? I want a list of to-dos. So we'll call it to-dos list. And this is just going to be an array. And inside of this array, we are going to have a property called done. That's going to be false. We're going to have a description. And sure, learn Angular. That sounds awesome. We're going to have another one, done false. And this one is going to be a description. We're going to say attend the Angular community meetup. And we'll start with that for right now because that's funny that my to-do highlighter is picking that up and highlighting it. Got a false positive on that. But we'll start here because we're going to build this up. So, our naive implementation is we will use, so we're going to use a field set. And inside of here, we're going to have a label. And then we will have an input. Our type equals checkbox. And why did it take off my quotes? And we're going to use ngModel again. And we're going to bind this to. So ngModel allows us to do two-way binding. And for those of you who are more familiar with Angular, don't get too mad at me, but we're going to bind this to to-dos list 0 dot done. Right, and our label to get, we can do an interpolation is what this is called with the double curly braces. We can grab to-dos list 0 dot description. Great, so we save that. Everything builds successfully. Come to our browser. We've got our field set, and we've got Learn Angular. You'll have to take my word for it right now that this checkbox is, well, no, you don't have to take my word for it. We'll use some more interpolation. We'll interpolate the done. So to-dos list 0 dot done. Everything built successfully. And you'll see now that it says that we're not done, and now we are. So we can see that the ngModel is a two-way binding. And as I change the property here, the value here, from true to false, it's being shown here. There's a problem with our code though. And the problem is, as we add new items to the to-do list, because of the way we've written things, and I'm going to intentionally make an error here to show even more. So, we've added our second, but to add another line, we keep having, and if we add a third thing, then now we've got to go and add a third line, and it's horrible and unwieldy. And how do we get around it? Oh, and look, notice that these both say Learn Angular. What did I do? Well, I made a stupid mistake on purpose, but it's a common mistake that can be made when you do things this way, that I forgot one of the indexes. Another problem we have is if we look at this looks horrible. If somebody visited your site, oh, but this looks horrible. If you came to a job and you turned this in and they looked at it, they'd go, what is this? How can we use this? This looks terrible. And then in your code review, you get horrible feedback because you're using manual ways of doing things. So first of all, we'll fix the look and feel. One thing to get into the habit of doing is committing often. The benefit to this, to committing often, is that you're creating small checkpoints as you go through your code. And these small checkpoints are going to help us. If we make mistakes in the future, we can always go back to these small checkpoints. Earlier this week, I had a friend contact me, and she was working on some code, and she meant to delete some files, but wound up deleting a whole bunch of other files. And it was a whole day's work, and it was a really scary situation to be in. Luckily, there's a history in VS Code, and we were able to get her files back. But if you commit often, then situations like that are less likely to happen. So we're going to commit often and make sure that we're following good practices to make sure that things are looking good. So before we add any new libraries, we always want to make sure that everything looks good. So we're going to call this a working to-do application. Not really, but it is what it is. So we're going to add the Angular material. And to add Angular material, we're going to visit their library. Close that. And Angular material has a whole bunch of nice components. You'll notice that, they've got all sorts of great stuff. Cards, we'll be using a card to make our stuff look better. Our checkboxes will look a lot better. And this is all based on research done by Google in best practices. So I'm not a good UI designer. I can make things look okay, but Google definitely is much better than I am. So we're going to use Angular material. To do that, we're going to go to get started, and we're just going to follow their instructions. They say to use ng add Angular material. So that's what we're going to do. And notice that because we have NX jumps in and they're like, wait, are you sure you want to do this? We don't support the Angular CLI. No, we're not going to run this command. So we're going to say false, and we are going to do an NX add Angular material. Well, we'll copy their command. So what they're suggesting, they're saying, hey, don't do ng add. Instead, use yarn to add it. We're going to add the library, and then the -w's are right. And then they're saying that we're going to run the NX generator for the Angular material ng add. So we're going to run that command. Yarn is grabbing Angular material for us. Looks like I've got some dependency issues, but now it's running the CLI, and now it's running the ng add generator from Angular material. We're going to pick we'll do a purple and green. Yes, we'll use the typography. Yes, we're going to use the Angular material animations. And now it's adding some more packages that will be needed for material. And we'll look at what was added after this is all done. Just to understand what's going on in our environment when all of this is happening. So we're just making sure that. So NX is giving us a warning that the Angular dev kit called write workspace that may have unintended consequences. It's telling us to check out our Angular JSON. We'll make sure to do that. We're getting a warning that we shouldn't be using default builders for test, which I'll need to look into what that means. But then it's updated our package JSON and a bunch of other files for us, and then we're done. So let's go look at what was added. So if we look at the project.json, basically it looks like it just reformatted that. Fine. This one, it also just reformatted it, so whatever. The app modules, notice that Angular Material added a browser's animation for us, which is needed by Angular to be able to animate and make the material components look nice. So in our index HTML, it's actually added some links to Google Fonts for us, which is nice. And notice that it's added the matte typography. This is a special command used by Angular Material to set up the typography for us. In our styles.scss, it's set up our fonts for us, which is nice. And it's also made sure that our body and our height have 100% on them, which will be nice in the future when we're trying to make sure that things size properly. Typical, most people add a margin of 0, which means that everything goes right up to the edge of the screen. It's particularly useful in phones. And then inside of our package.json, it's added the Angular CDK, which is needed for Angular Material, and it's added Angular Material. And then it's updated our yarn lock. So everything looks good to me. Even though it scared us, we can just say that we added Angular Material. And we're going to commit that. Oh, I haven't done a push. That's another good thing to do. I've had machines just break on me sometimes. And if you're doing a push, that basically means that the server also has your branch. So we're serving our project again, waiting for that to build with the Angular material in it. And while we're looking at this, while I'm waiting for that, things don't look any better. In fact, things look worse because the margin 0 now pushed everything up against the sides and up against the top, and everything just looks horrible. So let's go about fixing that. The first thing we want to do is just come into Angular Material and look at a card. We're going to use a card to hold our to-do component because it's going to look nicer. And you know, the nice thing about Material is it gives us all sorts of examples of cards that we can look at. And as you're looking at them, you can look at the code and see, you know, how to use it. We are going to use something probably similar to this, where we'll have a title and then we'll have content. We'll use this. And so we've got an example of how to use a mat card. First thing we're going to do is we're just going to take off the field set. We don't need it. And instead, we're going to replace it with a mat card. And you'll notice that it says that mat card isn't a known Angular component. You're right, mat card isn't a known Angular component because we need to go into here and I like to make sure. This is me, but I find it helps quite a bit if I keep my imports in alphabetical order. So we're going to import material. We're going to import the material card module. We're going to bring that in from Angular Material. Is there not a material card module? If we look, mat card module. This is what I like about Angular Material is all of their API reference, and it tells you what you need to import from where. It's just a very well thought out, well put together library. So we're going to import mat card module. Is that not from Angular Material? Look again. Oh, I need to go one level deeper. It's exposed by angular material / card. And down here, we're going to update this. Just be the mat card module. Now we'll save that. Failed to compile. In our package.json, the version of material that it brought in is version 14.0. We don't want that. And the CDK is also version 14.0. And we look here in our package.json. So it only added the CDK. So we're going to use yarn. And we're going to remove angular material. And I should have paid closer attention to what was going on here, because it specifically said that it was installing version 14 and we could have stopped it before we got to the point where we did. That's okay. So we've now removed our angular material, and we need to remove the angular CDK. Okay, so now we removed it. Anyway, what we want to do is we want to go back to our yarn add, and our angular material we're going to add at version 13. Whatever the latest version of 13 is, we're going to be adding that. But it is adding 13.3.9. So we added 13.3.9. We're going to do purple green again. We're going to set up angular typography, and we're going to set up the browser animations. All right, so let's take a look at what happened. So it didn't change any of the other stuff that was already set up for material. In our package.json, I would prefer that was a pinned version, but oh well. Our yarn lock, we're locked at 13.3.9. So we'll commit that and just say we're using the proper version of material. And this is a good lesson to learn. If you're behind the current releases, you often need to specify what version you're going to be using. Now, if we do an nx serve, it's going to build everything using the proper version of Angular material, and we shouldn't get errors in our console. All right. So now we've got a card. Our card is black. It doesn't look that good. What can we do to fix this? What would be nice is if this had a title, and if instead of taking up the full screen, it only took up, we had a nice margin around the sides. So let's do that. And we go into our app.html. We'll add a div. Actually, let's do it a different way. Have you guys ever used the Emmett stuff? I love this stuff. But we can use Emmett to wrap this with a div that has a class of, we'll call it the main display for now. So Emmett is a nice little language that you can use to create all sorts of cool stuff. You can do div times 5 dot test. And if you expand that, it creates 5 divs that have the test class on them. You can even do something like div times 5 with a child paragraph that has lorem ipsum in it. So Emmett's amazing. I love it. It's a good tool to know. All right, so we've got our main display. How do we make main display look good? We come into our SCSS file and we add a class. We'll call it main display to match what we just added. Let's do a width, and we'll make that width, I don't know, 80%. And we want to center it, so we can do a margin of auto. Everything built. And when we look, now we aren't clear out to the edges, but we're still at the top, which, you know, doesn't look that good. So let's fix that. We'll add a margin top of, I don't know, we'll do 2 rem. And there we go. Now we've got our card